Hello and welcome. Today I want to talk about diffusion of innovation theory. What is diffusion of innovation theory? How is it normally used? And really, more importantly for my channel, how can it apply to communities, community building, and the visionaries that are leading their communities through change? Hi, my name is Danielle. I'm a community mentor, and Vibrant Systems is my business, my baby, my life purpose. Use whichever words you want to put in there to describe it. My mission is to help people build their capacity for connection, for community, and for environmental impact. Because all of these things are needed for changing the world that we live in a way that supports not just ourselves and our children, but also the next generations that are going to be coming. So let's dive into it. What is diffusion of innovation theory? In short, it is a theory of how change moves through a system, a society, a community, an organization. It talks about how these innovations, these new ideas, these new visions, these trailblazed pathways don't get adopted all at once. There's three groups that they get adopted in. The first are the early adopters, then there's the general adoption, I think is, oh my gosh. It took me, this is the second time I've recorded this video, and it's the first time that I've remembered that word. There's general adoption, and then there is the late adopters. And you will find, when you research diffusion of innovation theory, that there is this really handy graphic to talk about this. And in this graphic, in curved lines, it shows us how the early adopters come first, and they're usually a very small wave. Then we have general adoption that moves through the greater system. More and more people get on board, and it's not right away. It starts slow, and then it, peaks and then tapers off. And then we have the late adopters, and they're the people who really want to wait and see if this change, innovation, new idea is actually worth it. I was first introduced to diffusion of innovation theory in climate adaptation, because when we talk about adaptations such as renewable energy sources or new ways of mitigating floods, for example, those can be some very, or at least the risks can be perceived as very high in those transitions. For example, with renewable energy, is it reliable? Is it going to meet the needs? Is it actually better off, or are we using more resources in another area? Those are all very valid questions. Flood mitigation or any other kind of emergency preparedness, same thing. If it's not better than what we have going on, we can actually lose lives, let alone the cost to infrastructure, if it's not a meaningful adoption, if it's not an innovation that's going to help us. So with the diffusion of innovation theory, it really helps kind of answer these questions and gives a good feel for those who are responsible for moving change through systems, gives them a good feel for what to expect. Now, when we talk about early adoption versus general adoption versus late adoption, it's never about things like intelligence or money or power. It's very much baked into our biology, frankly. Humans are wired to survive, to be safe. Evolutionarily, our brains are wired to keep us safe from threats and uncertainty, newness, change. It may not be dangerous, but because it's unknown, there may be threats that we cannot see. And that's normal. That makes sense. Like I said, in the context of emergency management, for example, change could very much mean actual mortality increases, deaths, injuries, infrastructure costs. Very much so, it is a high-stakes place for change to occur. So it's not to say that the early adopters are smarter for using research to guide their choices. There's something else that sets apart an early adopter, a visionary, a leader, a trailblazer from the rest of the community. And that's what I want to talk about in this video. Because if you're someone who's sat with my content for some time, or maybe you're just finding it, but if you're someone who kind of always feels like you're at the forefront of something new, or you have a vision, but nobody else around you is really supportive of that vision because it's very different than what they're used to seeing, then you came to the right place, because I'm the same way. Now, like I said, we're not here just because we're smarter. We're here because we see a vision. We see a path that we want to walk, that no one before us has really walked. And as a business owner myself, there are elements of my business that existed as a vision in my head long before I was even able to do the work to embody the actions, the person who was able to make those visions real. And a lot of the people around me were probably looking at me like, are you sure? Are you sure you want to use your life savings to get that off the ground? I don't even blame them. Like I said, most of us are wired to see the threats that might exist in uncertainty. I am too. We all are, if the wiring is, turned on the right way. I suppose there are conditions where it's not the point. The real difference between the early adopters versus the general community versus the late adopters has to do with our ability to sit with discomfort, distress tolerance, and our ability to regulate ourselves in that newness. And if you are a community leader, if you have a vision, if you want to connect people in a different way, this is a skill you need to learn if you want to bring your vision to life. So, distress tolerance, let's talk a little bit about that. What does that actually mean? Frankly, it's a skill, like a muscle. It can be learned, it can be strengthened. So if you don't feel like you have it, don't worry, you can learn it. But it is a skill that helps us develop the capacity to sit with uncertainty, with discomfort, and with general distress, anxiety, frustration. Anything that gets your heart rate up, distress tolerance helps us move through. And like I said, it's a skill. Anyone can learn it. Whether you want to be an early adopter or not, this is a skill you can learn. This is a skill that helps you navigate conflict in communities, in family situations even. It's a skill that helps you tolerate the frustration that comes from learning new skills or being in new environments and with making mistakes. It's a skill that helps us believe in and actually act towards our ability to expand and learn and become someone new every single day. Because if you have a vision, I can almost guarantee that as fantastic as you are right now and as fantastic as that vision is, you're probably going to need to change and grow to see that vision come to life. Otherwise, it wouldn't just be a vision. It would be part of your life already. And that's why I'm creating this video, because I think it's so important for all of us, but especially those early adopters, especially those trailblazers, especially those visionaries, to develop this distress tolerance. So how can we do that? How can we actually be in communities in a way that we can lead people through changes, that we can build up the collective distress tolerance so that we can focus on what matters? The first step is, generally speaking, you need to know how to regulate your nervous system. And you're probably not hearing this for the first time. Our nervous system, again, it's that wiring, our biological wiring that keeps us safe. Very simply, our fight or flight response, the adrenaline that we feel when we feel like we're in danger, is there to help keep us safe. That's why it exists. But in modern day, with the kinds of threats and stresses that we do have to encounter, it's not always helpful. And when our mind is perpetually ruminating, or it's anxious, or it's generating new ways that things can go wrong, or new risks that we might not be able to see, that's keeping that nervous system up here when we need to be down here in order to move through these changes. How do we regulate our nervous system? Great question. There's a lot of different ways we can go about it. I'm going to share a few of my favorites, and honestly, you're probably not going to like this one. Maybe you will. Maybe you're like me already. The first one that I continuously go back to and return to is meditation and mindfulness, which you don't have to sit and close your eyes and breathe deeply for 10 minutes to meditate. You can get the same benefits from mindfulness from any activity that brings you back into the present moment. And for myself, I actually started this journey with mindful coloring, going for walks and really focusing on noticing what was going on in my neighborhood. I would put on music and just fully listen to the music, oftentimes in a bathtub. There's a lot of easier ways to get started with mindfulness if you've never meditated, especially if you're someone who's coping with something like ADHD. Another tip for those who are trying to get into mindfulness and haven't figured out haven't figured out a way that works well for them, figure out something you can do with your hands. Crocheting, knitting, fidget toys, of course, painting, coloring, all of those occupy our hands. And when our hands are occupied, it's easier to focus on the present moment often. Otherwise, that energy that we don't necessarily always realize we have often gets internalized, and that's when our mind starts to go. It took me a long time to realize that my rumination, my hamster wheel of thoughts, was very much related to my neurodivergence and lack of stimming in a physical way. It was mental stimulation instead. So with meditation, with mindfulness, what I really love about it is a way to call our energy back from those anxious thoughts, from those ruminating, from those mistakes we made in the past. It calls it all back and it puts it in the present moment. And as we practice this kind of presence, when we're moving through a change, when we're trailblazing that new path, when we're talking to community members and showing them that it's safe to make these changes, we can put all our energy into that in the present moment. And by putting more of our energy there, we're also putting our power there. And that helps make those moves, those changes, much more impactful. So in that way, I do really recommend that whoever you are, you do cultivate some sort of mindfulness practice to call your energy back in, to ground in the present moment, and to give yourself a break from the stress cycles that are caused by our mind trying to be everywhere at once. The other piece I would like to share is that if you're someone who's moving through change, and maybe that change is just you, that change is a change you're making in your life. It's a discomfort and a growth you're making in your life. Or maybe you are a community leader. Maybe you are walking your community through a kind of change. It's so important to cultivate times of rest and grace during this change, because change does take energy. And yes, the mindfulness can bring the energy back to that present moment, and it can help us stay focused on why we're making the changes we're making rather than what could all possibly go wrong. But when we allow ourselves to rest and play and be creative in this change as well, that again shows our body that we're safe. Play is a great way to show our body that we're safe. And most of us need to spend more time playing in some way. And that can look like coloring outside the lines. It can look like playing an instrument or even a video game. But unstructured play is a great, great opportunity to expand your capacity for change and to show your body you can rest. So play, celebration, dance, things that bring out joy and laughter. And this, I love it for community as well, because communities also need to cultivate these spaces of play and joy, right? Because that's what makes people want to keep coming back to a community. At least in my experience, most people join something they care about, not just because they believe it's important, but because they also feel fulfilled and joyful to be there. Otherwise, they're going to burn out, right? So really, when you're in the process of driving change in a community, how are you bringing in opportunities for play and enjoyment and laughter and nourishment through that change? Also, pro tip, as long as I've worked in community building, community adjacent work, which is a decade now, food has been a great way to connect people and a great way to bring people into a more present state of calmness so they can move through change. I learned this especially in strategic management type sessions when we get into the visioning and the working together or working through tough problems. Always better after lunch, because then people aren't moving as much from their ego. They're more open and they're more cooperative with the others they're working with, especially if not everybody around the table has been there forever. So those are a few of the tips I would like to share with you of how the diffusion of innovation theory can be applied in communities and real ways that we can actually start to support change management, growth, trailblazing, visioning on a community level that isn't just, boardroom talk. It's real, it's connected, and it's based on what makes us human. Because our humanity is, what connects us above everything else. And we're not just in community with humans, of course, but humans are often very much the biggest allies we'll experience in this area, and at times the biggest challenges and barriers we'll experience. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe for more community building content. I also offer guided meditations if you're someone looking to build that mindfulness muscle up. Leave a comment about your thoughts, and if you're someone who you are a trailblazer, you are a visionary, and whatever I said today was something that you felt resonate deep within, I'd love to work with you. One of the things I do with Vibrant Systems is I offer community mentorship. And that means I work with the community builders, the community leaders, to move through this process of visioning and into action in a way that's very grounded and aligned and recognizes the amount of growth that we need to go through in this space. If you're interested, I'll leave the link below for that as well in the description. My name is Danielle. My mission is to help people deepen their connections, not just to themselves, but also to the others they are in community with and to the environments that they live in. Again, subscribe for more content like this if you would like to, and let's make your story a vibrant one.